Ethan had always dreamed of owning a home. A place where he could finally settle down, free from landlords, rent hikes, and the ever-present anxiety of noisy neighbors stomping above his ceiling. When he found the perfect house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, he thought he had won the lottery. The yards were neatly trimmed, the sidewalks were clean, and the whole community seemed like something out of a suburban fairy tale. At least, that's what it looked like on the surface. The illusion shattered the very next morning. Ethan was still unpacking when a sharp knock echoed through his new home. Standing at his doorstep was a woman in her mid-50s, clutching a thick binder against her chest. Her perfectly ironed blazer and stiff, plastic smile screamed corporate cheerfulness, but there was something in her eyes, calculating, assessing, like she was mentally writing down every single thing she disapproved of. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said sweetly. "I'm Karen, the president of the HOA. I just wanted to personally introduce myself and make sure you're familiar with our community's guidelines." She handed him a hefty handbook, its pages filled with dense, small-print text. Ethan barely had time to skim the cover before she continued, her eyes already scanning his yard. "We like to keep things in perfect order around here. Let me know if you have any questions, I'll be checking in soon." Something about her tone made his skin crawl, but he brushed it off. She was probably just one of those hyper-organized community types. No big deal. 3 days later, the first letter appeared on his door. "Violation notice. Your exterior paint does not conform to the HOA-approved palette. Please repaint within 7 days to avoid further action." Ethan stared at the paper, confused. His house was beige, just like half the homes on the street. He flipped open the handbook Karen had given him and found an entire section dedicated to acceptable shades. His color, apparently, was one shade too dark. It was ridiculous, but he let it go. Maybe it was just bad luck. Then came another letter. And another. One for his trash bins being left out for 31 minutes after pickup. Another for his lawn being too patchy, despite being freshly mowed. A third warning about his mailbox, which was, according to Karen's handwritten note, 3 inches too tall. Ethan's frustration simmered, but it wasn't until he came home one evening to find his front door locked and a bright red sign plastered across it that he realized what he was dealing with. Property deemed non-compliant, entry prohibited until further notice. His stomach twisted. Was this a joke? A prank? He jiggled the handle again. Still locked. The realization hit him like a brick. The HOA had locked him out of his own home. Rage surged through him. He stormed down the street, marching straight toward the one person responsible. When Karen opened her door, she was already smirking. "Oh, Ethan," she said, feigning concern. "I was just about to call you. Unfortunately, your home has been found in violation of HOA standards, and as per our bylaws." "You locked me out of my own damn house," he interrupted, his voice tight with fury. Karen's smile widened. "Technically, the HOA did." Ethan clenched his fists. "That's not how property ownership works, Karen." "Well," she said, tilting her head, "it is here." Ethan barely slept that night. The anger boiled inside him like a pressure cooker, every passing hour making it worse. The absurdity of the situation was almost laughable, almost. He had spent years saving up for this house, planning for a future in a neighborhood he thought would be peaceful. Instead, he was being treated like a trespasser in his own home. He knew one thing for sure: if Karen thought he would roll over and accept this, she had picked the wrong guy to mess with. The next morning, he took a deep breath, sat down at his kitchen table, and did what he did best: he started digging. He knew there had to be something about the HOA that wasn't right. No one should have this much power, and if Karen was using it like a personal weapon, then there had to be a way to fight back. But where to start? The handbook she had given him was thick, but it was just rules and regulations. He needed to look deeper. Then he remembered Tom. Tom was a longtime resident, one of the few people who had hinted at Karen being a nightmare to deal with. Unlike most of the neighbors, who kept their heads down to avoid trouble, Tom had seemed just annoyed enough to be willing to talk. Ethan walked over and knocked on his door, unsure if he would even be home. To his relief, Tom answered almost immediately. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Tom said, giving Ethan a knowing look. Ethan let out a tired laugh. "You too, huh?" Tom nodded. "Everyone who moves in here goes through it. Some just take it, some fight back. But no one's ever really won." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "That's about to change." Tom hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, Tom led him to a cluttered garage, where stacks of old boxes lined the walls. He pulled down a thick binder and set it on the workbench. "I've been keeping copies of HOA records for years. Meeting minutes, financial statements, policy changes, everything." Ethan's pulse quickened. "How did you even get this?" Tom smirked. "Karen's not as good at covering her tracks as she thinks. Besides, most people are too scared to dig through this stuff. You'd be surprised what you can find when no one thinks you're looking." Ethan flipped open the binder, scanning through pages of mundane bureaucratic nonsense, budget reports, landscaping regulations, resident complaints. But then, something caught his eye. A financial statement labeled administrative expenses showed thousands of dollars allocated to vague categories like consulting fees and executive travel. He frowned. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Tom leaned over. "That's what I've been wondering for years. Karen claims HOA fees go toward community improvements, but if you look around, what's actually getting improved?" Ethan thought about the sidewalks that were cracked and uneven. The playground that hadn't been upgraded in over a decade. Yet Karen's house, with its pristine landscaping, custom security system, and newly paved driveway, was somehow untouched. His jaw tightened. "She's using HOA funds to upgrade her own property." Tom nodded. "And we're the ones paying for it." Ethan flipped to another report, one that listed all the officially approved home modifications over the past 5 years. It was a short list, only a handful of requests had been granted. But right at the top was a record of Karen's home receiving multiple improvements under a budget labeled community beautification. Security upgrades, landscaping enhancements, and, he had to reread it twice to believe it, a private heated driveway, paid for entirely with HOA funds. His fingers curled around the edge of the page. The hypocrisy was staggering. "So let me get this straight," Ethan said, forcing himself to stay calm. "She's been fining people for having the wrong mailbox, but she gets to use HOA money to install high-end security cameras and redo her entire yard?" Tom sighed. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Ethan exhaled sharply, trying to rein in his frustration. "This has to be illegal." "Oh, it definitely is," Tom said. "But she's smart. Everything is buried under layers of HOA policies that no one questions. And if someone does, she buries them in fines until they can't afford to fight back." Ethan kept flipping through the files, each page confirming what he already suspected: Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a full-blown scam, exploiting HOA rules to funnel money into her own home while crushing anyone who stood in her way. And yet, somehow, it got worse. As he reached the back of the binder, he found a section that listed foreclosed properties within the HOA's jurisdiction. There were names he didn't recognize, but one stood out. A woman named Margaret Reed. Next to her name was a notation: violation, unauthorized exterior modifications. Ethan frowned. What happened to her? Tom sighed, rubbing his face. Margaret was 82. She had trouble walking, so she installed a small handrail on her front steps. Karen fined her for unauthorized exterior modifications and kept piling on penalties until she couldn't afford to fight it. She had to sell her home. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Are you kidding me? Tom shook his head. Nope. And it's not just her. Karen has done this to a lot of people, mostly the elderly or disabled. The worst part? She's got a real estate investor friend who conveniently buys up the houses after they go into foreclosure. Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't just about petty fines or an overzealous HOA. Karen was deliberately driving vulnerable people out of their homes for profit. His hands tightened into fists. We're going to take her down. Tom grinned. Now you're talking. Ethan left Tom's house with a fire burning in his chest. The deeper he dug, the uglier it got. This wasn't just about arbitrary fines or Karen's absurd power trips, this was corruption on a level that ruined lives. Elderly homeowners forced out over nonsense violations, houses scooped up by her investor friends, HOA funds siphoned into her own backyard. She wasn't just a neighborhood dictator, she was a predator. And the worst part? She had been getting away with it for years. But that was about to change. Ethan spent the next several nights combing through the files Tom had given him, compiling every piece of damning evidence into a meticulous case. Financial fraud, unethical evictions, misuse of HOA funds, it was all there in black and white. Every time he thought he had found the worst of it, something even more enraging surfaced. By the time the weekend arrived, he knew he was sitting on enough proof to burn Karen's entire empire to the ground. The only question was how to expose her in a way she couldn't wriggle out of. That's when Karen made her next move. The knock came at Ethan's door late Saturday afternoon. He opened it to find two uniformed police officers standing on his front porch. Behind them, standing a few feet back with an expression of feigned concern, was Karen. Mr. Lawson, one of the officers said, his tone neutral but firm. Ethan's pulse quickened. Yeah, that's me. We received a report of harassment and threats made against Ms. Carter. She claims you've been stalking her and making aggressive attempts to intimidate her. For a moment, Ethan just stared, stunned at how boldly Karen was trying to flip the script. He turned his gaze to her, and she had the audacity to look shaken, like she was the victim. This is insane, Ethan said, exhaling sharply. I haven't done anything except try to uncover the truth about how she's been running this HOA like a personal empire. One of the officers glanced at Karen, then back at Ethan. Ms. Carter says you've been showing up at her home uninvited, following her around the neighborhood, and even threatening to destroy her. Karen sniffled. Like this was some tragic courtroom drama and not the most blatant abuse of authority Ethan had ever seen. This is my home, she said weakly, shaking her head. I just want to feel safe in my own neighborhood. Ethan clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. She was trying to weaponize the police against him, using the system as another tool in her arsenal of control. But she had miscalculated. Ethan took a slow breath. Officer, I have a security system installed with full footage of my property from the past several days. If you'd like, we can review the recordings together. I haven't stepped foot near her house since the day she locked me out of mine. Karen's face barely flickered, but Ethan caught it, the smallest twitch of panic. The officers exchanged a glance. Do you have the footage available now? Ethan nodded. Absolutely. Give me a minute. He went inside, pulled up the footage on his laptop, and brought it back outside. He clicked through the past several days, letting the officers watch as he came and went from his house, did yard work, and ran errands. Not once did he approach Karen's home, follow her, or engage in any form of harassment. The officers watched in silence. Well, one of them finally said, turning to Karen. It looks like Mr. Lawson has evidence that contradicts your claims. Karen flushed red. I must have misinterpreted things. I just felt unsafe, Anne. The second officer's expression hardened. Making a false police report is a crime, Ms. Carter. For the first time, Karen looked nervous. I just wanted the harassment to stop, she said weakly. I'm sorry if I overreacted. The officers gave her a warning before leaving, and Karen retreated quickly, slamming her door behind her. Ethan stood on his porch, fists clenched at his sides. She had tried to set him up. She wasn't just a power-tripping HOA president. She was willing to ruin someone's life to keep herself untouchable. And that? That was her biggest mistake yet. Ethan now knew that if he wanted to take her down, it had to be public. It had to be something she couldn't worm her way out of, something so undeniable that the entire neighborhood would see her for the fraud she was. Because now, it wasn't just about exposing Karen's corruption. It was about making sure she never did this to anyone again. Ethan knew there was no turning back now. Karen had tried to use the police to silence him, but instead, she had just given him more fuel. If she was willing to go that far to protect her position, it meant she was scared. And if she was scared, it meant she knew she was vulnerable. He wasn't just some disgruntled homeowner anymore, he was the one person standing between her and total exposure. Now, he had to make sure everyone saw the truth. He spent the next few days reaching out to every neighbor who had ever complained about Karen, every person who had been fined, harassed, or pressured into submission. At first, most were hesitant. They had seen what happened to people who spoke up, relentless fines, harassment, even forced evictions. But when Ethan showed them the documents, the proof of the financial fraud, the illegal evictions, the misuse of funds, something shifted. Fear turned into anger. Quiet resentment turned into determination. The community had finally had enough. By midweek, Ethan had gathered enough signatures to call for an emergency HOA meeting. According to the bylaws, if a majority of homeowners agreed, a special meeting could be held, even without the president's approval. Ethan made sure every signature was accounted for and submitted the request directly to the HOA board. Karen must have seen it coming because the very next morning, an email blast went out to the entire neighborhood. Unauthorized community gatherings violate HOA policy and will not be recognized as official meetings. Any attempts to spread misinformation about HOA leadership will be met with appropriate legal action. Ethan laughed when he read it. It was the last, desperate move of someone who knew they were about to lose control. The best part? The bylaws were on his side. The meeting was happening, and there was nothing Karen could do to stop it. When the day arrived, the turnout was massive. More people showed up than Ethan had ever seen at a neighborhood event before. Homeowners filled the community center, whispering among themselves, some clutching folders of their own violation notices, others just waiting to see what would unfold. At the front of the room, Karen stood stiffly behind the HOA podium, clearly trying to pretend like she still had control. Since this is an unsanctioned meeting, I will remind you all that HOA decisions cannot be overturned without. Ethan cut her off. This is a sanctioned meeting, he said loudly, holding up a stack of papers. We gathered the required signatures. We followed the bylaws. You don't get to decide when the community has a say. Karen's smile tightened. I don't think you understand how HOA governance works, Ethan. Oh, I understand perfectly, he shot back. Which is why I'd like to start with a simple question. Why have over $155,000 of HOA funds been allocated to miscellaneous consulting fees over the past 2 years? The room went silent. Karen's expression barely flickered. All HOA expenses are carefully documented and used for community benefit. Ethan stepped forward. Is that so? Then can you explain why those community benefits seem to only apply to your house? He held up copies of the documents Tom had given him, the landscaping upgrades, the security system, the heated driveway, all funded with HOA money. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People turned toward Karen, their faces shifting from uncertainty to outrage. Karen tried to regain control. These expenses were necessary for administrative purposes. Oh really? Ethan interrupted. Then let's talk about the illegal evictions. A gasp spread through the room. Karen paled slightly, but Ethan didn't let up. For years, you've been forcing people out over petty violations. People like Margaret Reed, an 82-year-old woman who was fined into foreclosure for adding a handrail to her own front steps. Or the dozens of other homeowners whose properties just so happened to get scooped up by your real estate investor friends right after they violated HOA rules. Karen opened her mouth, but Ethan wasn't done. And let's not forget the biggest violation of all, he continued, flipping through the documents. Your term as HOA president expired last year. There was supposed to be an election. But instead of holding one, you just decided to keep the position. That was the breaking point. Shouts erupted from the crowd. People demanded answers. Some demanded her resignation on the spot. Karen looked around, realizing, for the first time, she had lost control. This is a misunderstanding, she said quickly. I have always acted in the best interests of this community. Ethan didn't let her escape. Then let's put it to a vote. Right here. Right now. If the community supports you, they'll vote to keep you. If not, it's time for new leadership. Karen's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies. She found none. A vote was called. It wasn't even close. By an overwhelming majority, Karen was removed as HOA president. She stood there, frozen, as the results were read aloud. For years, she had ruled over this neighborhood, treating it like her own personal kingdom. And now, it was gone. Ethan stepped forward one last time. Oh, and one more thing, he said, his voice calm, steady. I've already contacted a lawyer about the financial discrepancies in the HOA's accounts. Expect to hear from them soon. Karen's jaw tightened. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the podium. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the room. The moment she was gone, the room erupted into cheers. Homeowners shook Ethan's hand, patted him on the back, thanked him for standing up when no one else had dared to. Karen had spent years making people miserable. Now, she was the one being thrown out. And Ethan? He had just won the biggest battle of his life. Karen was gone, but the mess she left behind wasn't. In the days following her removal, the HOA board scrambled to sort through the financial disaster she had created. The lawsuit moved forward, and as expected, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Years of embezzled funds, fraudulent expenses, and blatant abuse of power painted a picture so damning that Karen didn't even try to fight it. When the court ruled against her, she was ordered to repay every cent she had stolen, plus penalties. The best part? She had no way to pay it back. Her personal savings weren't enough, and without her HOA position funneling money into her pockets, she was forced to sell her house to cover the legal costs. The very neighborhood she had ruled over like a dictator now belonged to someone else. By the time the dust settled, the HOA had undergone a complete transformation. Ethan, despite never wanting anything to do with HOA politics, was elected as the new president, not out of ambition, but because the neighborhood trusted him to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Under his leadership, the ridiculous fines disappeared. No more arbitrary mailbox measurements, no more absurd grass color requirements. The HOA was stripped of its ability to weaponize rules against homeowners, and for the first time in years, people actually wanted to be part of the community. But karma wasn't done with Karen just yet. Months later, Ethan checked his mail and found a letter with a return address from another HOA in a completely different town. Confused, he opened it. As soon as he read the contents, he burst out laughing. It was a violation notice, for Karen. Apparently, she had moved into a new neighborhood with an even stricter HOA than the one she had ruled over. And in a stroke of poetic justice, she was already racking up violations for things like an unapproved mailbox, failing to get permission for a garden statue, and leaving her car in the driveway overnight. The letter ended with a warning: if she didn't comply, she could be expelled from the community. Ethan sat back in his chair, shaking his head with amusement. After everything she had done, after the years she had spent making life miserable for others, Karen was finally on the receiving end of her own tyranny. And the best part? No one was coming to save her. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.